where do you think the UFO conversation goes from here? Because there are two camps. One is, if we were having this conversation 40, 50 years ago and we were kind of invested in the issue, it probably would have been the wrong investment, right? Like not a lot happened. And then the other camp is things seem to be kind of unraveling quickly and snowballing. And so, yeah, where do you think things go from here?
This is the tough question. I don't think it's going back in the bottle.
Yeah.
I think we will be facing more disruption, recognition, information soon. I take the title of Lou Elizondo's book seriously.
Yep.
Right. He doesn't say that for a reason, and he's given other remarks that indicate this is not something you're going to be just like kick the can for decades.
Yeah.
Right. I do not though fall into the camp of like there's a 2027 clock and they're showing up. Right?
Yeah.
I've heard that, and people have said that is like, word got around that they're going to come up and show up in 2027, and this is why we need to get ready, get people prepared, etc. I don't rule it out, but like that seems like not my baseline scenario. I think I see a convergence of things that are now kind of historically. It's like the vibe, right? It's almost like there are things that I know that people are potentially going to come out and say publicly, but is that going to be what we call capital D disclosure, right? It's like, who's paying attention? Who cares?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's like information can come out either via individuals in sort of a stochastic self-organized process, and they may have the professional bona fides, the historical experience, the credibility to get maybe the next marginal increment of the population to pay attention and go, what the hell? Right. But we've had a number of those people already. Right. It's just like we're kind of on this ratchet, which is like the Chaim Michels, the Canadian defense minister. More recent era, you've had David Grush, you've had Lou, you've got Carl Nell, you've got Christopher Mellon. Like these are not like household names, but we're climbing this ladder here.
Yep.
Right. And we've had suggestive remarks come from multiple presidents. And this is like an accretion over time. And I think I expect there'll be more individuals of senior caliber coming out and saying things, but I think it will be in alignment with an evolving political process that I think is non-deterministic, right? In the sense that like the UAP Disclosure Act was, one version of this kind of controlled process, but that was written before people thought that Trump was going to have a unified government and is now going to have RFK and Vivek in there and Elon in there doing truth and reconciliation committees and like opening up all the books on everything.
Yep.
Like, I'm sorry, but like that's not like those are just different. Those are very distinct approaches to this. Yeah. And I don't know if the UAP Disclosure Act process of having 9, sort of technocrats appointed by the president. I mean, I think that could still survive. I think it's an important process because you need to have an accountable, independent procedure here. But if I'm just making a forecast, like it's likely going to be messier than what that process originally envisioned, right? Just. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know how, but like Vivek, I know is very interested in the subject. JD is very interested in the subject. Yeah. Elon seems to have changed his tune a bit. Yeah. RFK is very interested in the subject. Trump has obviously talked about it. So where this sits in there, like how they're going to manage this, who are they going to assign this problem, right? That's gonna be the big question. And then is this
should we try to get appointments?
I don't know, man. You want the red dot in your head?
Probably not. Yeah.
Better to be behind the camera than,
the guy actually doing stuff as far as disclosing. Yeah, that's probably right.
I mean, it's interesting. Like the Controlled Disclosure Campaign Plan would set up this UAP Records Review Board, and that Records Review Board would have all the status of an executive department agency, obviously the subpoena authority, the unilateral declassification authority with presidential override. But it would also allow them to, leverage the capacities and authorities of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, so they could actually, with a budget, issue contracts. So they could hire full-time staff and issue contracts to third-party advisors to write reports and studies and contribute to, expert analysis on the various strands of these questions, which would be explicitly under their mandate to report and make recommendations to the president across all these instruments of national power, right? That Carl Nell has talked about. And so that is like the standard, like DC approach. We got a tough problem. There's a hot potato. The Senate really doesn't want to have to own it. The House really can't deal with it. The executive branch is kind of like, looking into its own backyard, and the NSC is, relatively small. And so we're going to convene and impanel this independent group. It's going to be, president will obviously have veto authority, but it's going to basically everyone gets to pass the hot potato to this group. So that logic might still stand, right? Because I could see between the incoming administration that same basic sense of like, do I really want this to come out, but do I want to own this hot potato? Do I want to like navigate all this morass? Or do I want to be like, I agree, we should have this independent group over here of people that I can recommend. They're kind of like, my friends and allies or whatever.
Yeah.
But like they do the hard work.
Yeah.
And they dig with the messy stuff and they get a budget and they get the clearances and they get the contracts. And then that becomes a separate, more institutional apparatus to formally go through this sort of thing and make recommendations to President Trump. I think I would still push for the UAP Disclosure Act versus say some ad hoc Vivek Truth and Reconciliation Committee that God knows how that would be formalized and stood up and structured, and also like what other things would be sort of stuffed under its remit. It would dilute its purpose, distract it, politicize it potentially. And I think it's just better course of action to just put the energy behind this existing framework. I think it doesn't matter who you appoint. Obviously, that's like, the structure is there. It's how you fill out that structure, like who gets appointed to these positions if they pass this law under the new admin. So we'll see. But also there's the legacy folks inside the House that you still have to deal with, right? Like the Rogers and Turner. And we'll see how much, like in general, like an incoming administration has lots of priorities and certain reservoir of political capital.
UFOs is not at the top of that list.
Well, that's the interesting thing. It's like, it's hard to say how it fits. And, honestly, a path of least resistance for them is to just kick it to an independent group, right?
Yeah.
Because if they're going to go through this dirty laundry glasnost procedure, you might have to spend a lot of your own executive political capital, like on like adjudicating every one of those decisions on this record, this thing, this program, this like, where's that line going to be drawn? It's like a case by case, and that's a messy thing, right?
Yep.
I'm not sure any of these people want to be making those decisions or spending their political capital fighting, God knows who, right? Whereas like, hey, kick it over to this group, give them a bunch of money, give them a clear mandate, let them deal with it, and you kind of are hands off to a certain extent. And then the important decisions you can kind of airdrop in and put your thumb on the scale. So that would be preferred scenario to play out here. There is this scenario where, all these folks come in and they've been singing a certain tune. They go disclosure, openness, glasnost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then they get shown whatever it is. And they go, nah, sorry, guys. Nah, this whole UFO thing, I don't know. Nah, that we were just, we're good.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
Look over here. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always the scenario you have to, put onto to the table here. Cause I don't really know what's behind that curtain. Right. And whether there is something that's just like, nope, not going to talk about it. Right.
We hear an awful lot of unnerving stories from people like Jeremy Corbell or Ross Coulthart who are like ostensibly talking to people on legacy programs directly. And like they all say the same thing. So they get to a certain level in the conversation, whatever. And the person goes, if you knew what I know, you wouldn't be pro-disclosure or something. They sort of hint at some sort of extremely ontologically shocking truth. And I never know how to compute that. It's this sort of, epistemic impasse if you're on the other side of it, where it's like, I don't know.
That's why I think, the controlled disclosure campaign plan, sorry, I probably butchered that, is, like you almost need to shift human consciousness, right? It sounds a bit colloquial and woo-woo, but it goes back to earlier part of the conversation. It's like, we're embodied creatures, but we have certain mental capacities and a certain, folk worldview of what's possible, what's not. Like the immediate horizon of most people's lives is very, foreshortened. It's got to pay the rent, get the kids up for school, get through the day. And, the job of a state is to ensure that those background functions of everyday life are not subject to like radical volatility. That's why we have a state, is to ensure that like I can get on the road in the morning and get to work and my taxes are paid and my school starts on time and the teachers show up, and it's like, that just needs to happen, right? It's like that's the first order of business as a government, right? And so I do have sympathy for anything that the government could envision releasing to the public that threatens those sort of core, lifelines of society. it's like that's your job. As soon as like that would be the government essentially, committing harakiri, right? It'd be like just abdicating its fundamental responsibility. And so this is where the tension lies. And I think, the more that they can sort of get out of their own hands into civil society to manage, the better. Because the government shouldn't be the source of ontological truth for people. The government shouldn't be like a religious institution interpreting the world for its citizens. Like, that's not the job of the government to tell me like what the capital T truth is, like the nature of reality or any of this. Like, no, like you take my taxes, you defend me, you keep the lights on, like do that, right? I don't look to you to like, you're not the Pope, right? You're not.
But it's also not the job to suppress the capital T truth unless that involves some, clear trade secret on the national security front.
But this is where I think the mandate, like this is more philosophical, like what is the social contract in America? What is the form of government we have, the constitutional republic, and the understanding of the framers that has been evolved over time? Like, it's like there, even if you're originalist or you're, a flexible, kind of constitutionalist, like I don't think the National Security Act, the Atomic Energy Act, like can plausibly or even morally be extended to non-human intelligence fact of.
Yeah.
I reject that wholesale, that the fact of non-human intelligence is just not government information. Like existentially, legally, morally is not government information, right? Other things like the existence of advanced aerospace propulsion systems, material science breakthroughs, maybe even theoretical physics research, although that's litigatable, are government information. Those can be properly classified under a mandate where the authorities making those determinations, are doing so in accordance with our legal mechanisms for constitutional oversight, where, we have procedures, we have laws for secrecy and reporting to Congress. And it seems like on that front, we clearly have a problem, right? That needs to be cleaned up, where these programs have not been properly reported to, the cognizant oversight mechanisms in our system of government. And it's just like, yeah, like if you want to have a democracy the way that we think we have one, you need to fix that. Does that mean everything comes out? No, but it means that accountability objective clearly needs some work to be done. And then there's the disclosure objective, where the disclosure objective, at least for me, is the fact of non-human intelligence, if that is known with high confidence by the U.S. government, is illegitimately kept from the public. That's just not something they can keep secret. I think there's no moral justification for that, right? Even if it's like going to be destabilized. It depends on what you say, right? It's not like, you could say, yes, we're not alone. We're studying it. We're going to impanel these institutions, public, private sector, civil society to really understand it. And then you slowly leak out the sensitive information, right? That's maybe more prudent. It doesn't mean you release everything. But I think this omerta can no longer, I think, be effectively sustained, because I think it won't be, right? It's like clear that either adversaries or private sector or individuals from these programs are going to keep pushing that.
Yep.
And then you're in this game of no good choices if you're trying to manage that process of disclosure. It's like, you either get on board with this controlled mechanism, or it's going to be, RFK, coming in there and just like tweeting out, everything you've been doing. That's like, I think the last few days, I know we're recording a few days after the election. It is just like the shockwave is just like propagating through, right? And I think we haven't seen what this means for disclosure and what different actors now throughout these different systems that we're modeling now have to radically adjust their personal, like incentives here, right? It's like, okay, like, there was a story just about the FBI, right? Like off the record quotes from senior officials of the FBI being like, it was like the kind of a morbid joke that was, the senior officials on the whatever 7th floor, they haven't passed their fit test in a while, but they're going to need to run out the door. So there's an expectation filtering through, just say the FBI as an example, that it's just going to be purges.
Wild.
Right. And just so then carry that through, right? These other different structures. And if that is now, that's a radical change in the institutional bureaucratic environment that the UFO, the UAP disclosure conversation is now situated in.
Well, it's fascinating because, like, historically, you have JFK saying, I'm going to scatter the CIA to the winds, being at loggerheads with them. You have Nixon saying he's going to fire a third of the CIA or whatever. Maybe that was a sub narrative for Watergate a little bit. And then you have, similar stuff with Carter. Usually it doesn't end well for like the reforming president, but I've never seen so much force and power on the side of force reduction in bureaucracy as I do today with Elon, RFK, this coalition of like, we fucking had it. And like the history of this country is way more messed up than, people realize. We're going to like fire all these people. So I'm very curious to see how this ends. And if it's, history repeating itself, or if, maybe you do just see this massive watershed moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the tale as old as time, which is, how does this urge for reform not be captured, right? And to what extent, everyone has an agenda, right? Like it's, everyone's like, oh, good guys, bad guys, right? The deep state versus the, Elon Wonder team. It's like everyone is a flawed person. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone's working an angle, right? The question is, are the interests of civil society and public accountability, like those higher level objectives, are those being met or not met by the actions and decisions made by each of those different sides?
Yep.
It's like, I don't have allegiance to any particular team. I have allegiance to these higher level sort of social, political, and moral objectives. And so if anyone in particular decides to move in a direction that's aligned with that, I'm supportive. If they move against it, then I'm not supportive, right? And so this is where it would be important to watch, and for folks that are interested in, pushing UAP disclosure, to like hold people to account, right? Regardless of your particular team or tribe, and be like, I have a certain political objective. I think we need to establish these independent mechanisms of accountability and transparency. Whoever's in power, that's my expectation, right? Whether it's Elon or anybody else, it's like, this is where I'm going to hold you to account. So, that's what we're heading into now. It's going to be a lot of things are now on the table. And it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.